And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Translators on Air. My name is Dmitry and Elena. I'm your host. Joining me today, my incredible co-host, Elena Tereshchenkova. Hi, Elena.
Hello, guys.
And our guest today, Patricia Brenes. Hi, Patricia.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Patricia works in international organization in Washington, D.C. She has a master's degree in specialized translation from the University of Vic in Barcelona, and she is certified by ECQA as a terminology manager. After realizing that there was a limited availability of resources and information for linguists and others interested in the field, Patricia decided to start her own terminology blog with resources and information for translators. The blog is called inmyownterms.com, Terminology for Beginners and Beyond. And she recently published a free ebook called Terminology for Beginners, a collection of her blog posts presenting the basics on terminology. And in this episode, we're going to talk about how terminology can help you advance your career as a translator, why blogging is a great way to raise your visibility, and where you can find information on terminology. But before we jump to the topic of our conversation, I would like to make a few announcements. As always, the third season of Translators on Air has been sponsored by our friends at Smercat. Smercat offers a marketplace where you can find translation jobs, and you can also use their CAT tool absolutely for free. So if this is something you're interested in, check out Smercat by pushing the green button below this video if you're watching this live. Or if you're watching this or listening to this in the recording, you can always visit the first link in the description. Alrighty, we have a few people tuning in. Hello, Becky, Sylvia, Christina, Natalia, Sergio, Bobby, and someone hiding under the nickname Blue Lotus Translation. Sorry, I don't know your first name, but welcome to this webinar. This is a live webinar for those of you who have never used this platform before. Let me quickly introduce you to the basic features. There's a chat window on the right hand side. You can use it to say hi, where you're from, what languages you work with, and welcome our members. You can also post a question. We already have a few questions prepared in advance, and some of you posted questions. To do so, you just click the orange button below this video that says ask a question or suggest a topic. And Elena, Patricia, and I will be more than happy to answer your questions. Alrighty, Patricia, how are you?
I'm good, great. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited.
We are excited too. How are things in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, that's a good question. You mean politics or no? The weather is nice. Let's talk about the weather. It's really nice. It's it's springtime, so we're all happy about that. We can go out now.
Yeah. Patricia, I quickly introduced you to our viewers, and I know that a lot of our viewers actually know you from your own blog. But can you please tell us a little bit more about yourself, how you started in this wonderful profession?
I have been working in translation for a long time. I've been working, well, actually living in DC for 17 years, working in an international organization. And I was always curious about terminology. But I was thinking, what does a terminologist really do? And I wanted to do something related to terminology because it sounded so cool. But I really didn't know. So I started doing some research and I really couldn't find much information until one day somebody in a webinar, somebody mentioned it, were mentioning terminology. And that was like my first step. But also when I was doing my master's, I bought a lot of terminology books because I wanted to, my final project was to translate some very technical chapters in a book. And of course I had to do a lot of terminology research, and I ended up, learning a lot. So I started like that, like I had that as a basis, and then I started trying to find out what was available about terminology. In Google, I would say, what is a terminologist and what is terminology, but I couldn't find anything about where I can get training. So that was more out of curiosity at the beginning, and that's how it all started.
And why did you decide to start a blog on terminology? Was it a kind of scratching your own itch? I mean, that you didn't manage to find a lot of information on that, so you decided to provide some information.
Yes, exactly. I had taken, I think, maybe 2 or 3 webinars, somewhat related to their terminology, that I found, everywhere on the internet while I was researching. And during one of those webinars, I found out about TermNet certification that's given by the ECQA. And I took the basic and the advanced, and I had to do a final project. But since I was kind of new to terminology, I didn't have a project. And I had that idea of creating a blog in my mind, because I had been collecting so much information, but it was and it was a lot very technical. A lot of it was very technical. And I was like, what? I want to try to explain that in my own words. So that's why I call it in my own terms. Yeah. And I proposed that to the director, Gabriel Sober, and the sub-director, her name is Blanca Nájera, and they agreed. And I was like, well, yeah. And that's how I started the blog as my final project. And I gathered all the information that I had received from the webinars, from the class I took with them, all the classes that I took with them, all the research, because when you are if you're looking for what is terminology and you get all of these hits, so I would take a little bit here and there and put everything together in the blog and try to explain it, with my own words. Because to be honest, the books are very technical. You have to know a lot about linguistics and all of that. But you can also, the idea of the blog is that to introduce you to terminology, and then you can read the more advanced stuff.
Going back a little to what you said earlier, what was the most fascinating, the coolest thing that you found about terminologists, the people who deal with terminology?
Oh yeah, I love the history. That's my favorite part. Because, most people don't know that terminologists, the first terminologists were not really terminologists. Yeah. They were not linguists. They were engineers and all that. So I love writing, I found a name. I started finding the names in the publications, and I'm like, who is this? So I would start researching and trying to find as much information. Some of them were so old that we don't even have pictures of them, but we do have their work. So that was one of it still fascinates me to write. I would write biographies all the time, because it's so fascinating to see how they started doing that without knowing that they were, terminologists. And the first one to do it more systematically was Worcester, and there was a lot of people doing the same work like him in Russia, the Russian school, the Vienna school. They were doing the same work without knowing about it. So that's how it started with all the experts. So that's what I really love reading about and writing about their biographies.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. People's stories are always interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's something that you don't find in books. That's why I started doing it, because you see in the when you read an article, you see all the biography of these people, and you're like, who are they? And they were actually the ones who started terminology as a career.
Speaking about studying terminology as a career, what is involved in the work as a terminologist? Because I think everyone knows what a translator does for a living, but I think that the profession of terminologist is not quite as popular or visible as compared to translators. So can you shed a little bit of light of what is it like to be a terminologist, and what kind of work you do as a terminologist?
Well, there's I think in all professions, there are terminologists and terminologists. If you know that the University Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, Spain, they offer, I think they're only the only ones offering right now the full career as a terminologist, but they're more focused on academics. And of course, they offer all the theory that is based on Maria Teresa Cabre's theory, communication theory, and they offer workshops also. They have their own software, and they prepare people to be more into the research and academics. But they also prepare you, and in the case of TermNet, for example, it's more like, I would say, more for translators, how they want to manage the terminology, and they show you, because you have to know the theory, but also practice a lot. And you have to, for example, create a project in Trados if you have a specific topic. If you have, for example, renewable energies. So you have to do a lot of research and know how to use the tools. But the most important part is how you organize the information so that it can be reusable. And that's the objective of terminology, putting all of those terms in a systematic way so that you can reuse it and make your work a lot easier. So going back to your question, the task of a terminologist can vary depending on where you work, but it's mostly recording all that information, doing a lot of terminology research. It's very, sometimes it can be very exhausting, but it's really worth it, because once you have your glossaries and you put them in a tool, then you have all your work done for the future. And as I said, the main objective is to for the translator or even the expert, because we cannot only talk about translation. We can only talk about those who write original content and make their articles or their material consistent in terms of terminology. So it's a lot of work, but for all of us as translators and for experts, it's a lifesaver at the end. And it's everything about everything is about investing your time and your money, if you're gonna get good training, to make your terminology, to recycle your terminology, to make it usable. So a terminologist can do, as I said, from all pure terminology work, or just be in a university doing all the research to advance the terminology career.
You mentioned that terminologists use some tools. Can you give examples of the tools that, for example, translators can use to make a glossary, or some of the most convenient and effective tools?
Yeah, well, if a young translator cannot afford a terminology tool, and I cannot mention the names here, but I would say Excel is the best, because if you're starting as a translator and you don't have the money because you're starting and they're very expensive, you can do, if you learn how you can do a good glossary in Excel with all the columns that you need later to export later to terminology term base, then you can start like that. If you, as I said, if you're starting in a topic like, let's say, engineering or medicine, and you start doing work, you put your columns following the principles of terminology, and little by little, and there was one terminologist, I can't recall right now, but somebody asked her, how do you start? And she said, well, little by little. You don't have to have a million terms. You just start with the terms that you have. But if you do it right, then when you can actually afford the tool, and there's some free tools too, you can start maybe practicing with some free tools, and then you can take the first steps to, in the future, have a really useful tool when you do your translation.
You mentioned that education and training is quite important in the work of terminologists. Can you share a little bit about your personal training and what is involved in the training as a terminologist?
Yeah. Training right now, as far as I know, well, I mentioned the Pompeu Fabra. They're giving the masters in terminology, which is really good. I could only take one course because I was involved in too many things, but it's really, really good. I'm hoping that next year maybe I can take their workshop, at least because it's, you're learning from the experts. But in terms of terminology work, I would say TermNet. I think it's right now the only option that we would have. I know that some universities in Europe, a lot of universities in Europe are adding terminology to their curricula. But if a translator wants to know how to do terminology the right way, I would say TermNet in Austria. It's online, and and they also have in July, I think it's this week or next week, they start their summer school. Mm-hmm. And it's 1 week where you can get certified, but you have to be there. I might do that 1 year too, just to be, to meet the people, because I don't know some of them, but most of them I don't know. But I'd say that when I started, I took those free webinars just by chance because I found them. But that's how I got to TermNet, and that's how I got my training, and it's really good. And as I said, you have to, and actually I wrote, because when you start a subject and you don't know about it, you really don't know what to start. I mean, you are afraid to sign up to something. You don't know if you're ready, if it's for you. Yeah. So that's something I did in my blog. I wrote a post with all the topics that are covered in that training. And I provided the links to the posts that were related to those topics. Mm-hmm. So people can go there and see, well, this is what I need to know before I start, just to have an introduction. And they can be sure that they can do, a good job, and they can finish the certification. I think that the toughest part is the examination, because it takes 6 hours. Oh. So you have to have a lot of coffee. Yeah. Yeah, and for me, like in Europe, it's a lot easier. But for me, maybe the challenge was to get up at 4 a.m. because the classes were, in Europe, they were online, but they were live over there. But I had to get up at 3 or 4 to be live, because I wanted to ask live. They give you the recordings, but you always want to, ask questions at the end. But it was worth it. I really love it. It's I think it was worth it, and I learned a lot about terminology, and I was able to do my job a lot better.
I see.
Let me know if I talk a lot. So let me know if I'm not answering something.
No, it's okay.
And I can go back.
So, in your opinion, how do you think knowing the information about terminology and how to be a good terminologist, how does it help you to be a better translator? How can translators use this information about terminology to improve their own work?
I would say, it's, I wrote a post once saying that terminology is the DNA of translation. You cannot work if you don't know your terminology. I mean, you can be a good translator because you know your own language really well. But if you don't know your terminology, there's nothing much you can do. And that's the good thing about managing your terminology, because once you have your information organized, you're gonna be adding definitions, and you're gonna be adding context. And when you're working in a CAT tool, for example, you're gonna be translating, and the CAT tool is gonna start giving you all the terminology, so suggesting the terminology, it's also giving you the context, which is different from just a glossary, let's say Russian English, just the words, than having that term in context. And that's what makes the big difference. And that's what terminologists, translators should know, that if they follow the principles and they do all the, even if you have just the Excel file, even if you have the Excel file, when you insert a new term, make sure that you add the context, and if you can, you add the definition too. And that's the best way to know that the term that you're using is the correct one.
Can you tell us a bit about your new ebook, Terminology for Beginners? Who is it for? Why did you decide to write it? And where can people get it? It's probably on your blog, right?
Yeah, it is on my blog. And it was a friend, actually a colleague, that told me, why don't you put your blog into an ebook? And I told her, listen, I have like 500 posts. I cannot do that, because I think there's some tools that allow you to convert your blog into an ebook. But then I said, well, maybe if I had already created a section in my blog with all the main information on the basics, what's terminology, a little bit of history, and all a little bit of theory. But then I said, but maybe a lot of people don't know how to a lot of people don't know that the information is there. So maybe just putting there everything in an ebook, and it's easier for me to share the information. And I was most focused on the people who, like, Europe, they're very advanced in terminology, because Canada and Europe, they have been doing terminology for a long time. But I was thinking, like, countries like my country in Costa Rica, or Central American countries, Latin America, other countries outside Europe, people who, young students especially, or even young translators who don't know much terminology, well, that would be a nice way to give them an introduction and see if something actually they would like to pursue as a career. And if not, at least they will have the tools or the information to manage their terminology better. So it was a kind of a way to reach out to the people who don't have access to the information, the expensive books, because they're really expensive, like all books, they're really expensive. But even so, if you have a book on terminology or translation, that they're all about theory and linguistics. And it's great, because that's how it is. That's how a profession advances, with all the research and everything. But for a person, like a regular person, so to speak, without a PhD, I wanted to give them the opportunity to know about terminology without having to buy the books, if they have access, because there are some countries that you don't even have the possibility to get the books.
Yeah.
So, and my posts, my blog posts and the ebook, it's a bit of taking here and there the basic information. So that was the main purpose.
Yeah, it's always nice to have all the information in one place, all the basic information to get the gist of a topic. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, especially in our digital age, where the internet is growing bigger and bigger every single day, making sense of all the informational overload is quite a challenge. So kudos to you for bringing it, building it up together, and sharing it with the community.
Actually, I didn't expect that I was going to be, that famous. Not famous, but I didn't know that people were actually looking for that information, because I think the most rewarding part is hearing from my subscribers saying, "Oh, I didn't know about terminology," and young translators, and not so young either. And they said, "Well, I have heard about terminology, but wow, it is so interesting." And some people even told me have even told me that they wanted to become terminologists. And
Wow.
I think that's the best compliment that you can get. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. When you pour your heart and soul into something and you get feedback like that,
Yeah.
it's always
well, you guys
really
know
great.
that. That's the best reward. I know how hard you have been working on the mic,
The open mic.
the
open mic.
open mic, the
Yes.
open mic. Uh-huh. So.
Yes, yeah.
Well, you gotta love technology. It's what brings us together now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, technology is developing quite rapidly, and I think it's the future. And I think in the future, the situation on the market in general, and situation in our industry will be improving thanks to the technology, not despite of it. So,
yeah.
What do you think about the future of terminology? What are your opinion about the future of this field and how it's going to develop?
Well, I can say for sure that there's a lot of good things coming, because terminology is such a young discipline. We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. And so many things now with everything, all the new fields that are being created. We have, the Internet of Things, and there's so many possibilities. And I think, as I said before, like universities in Europe are starting to incorporate terminology more actively, and I think that's a clear sign that there's a lot of things that are going to be happening in terminology. As technology advances, we're going to be seeing a lot of new topics and new areas being created because of this technology. And I think that we were going to see a lot of more universities offering it and showing people how important it is to manage terminology. And even if you're a freelancer, it's like an added value to your resume, saying, well, I'm a terminology manager too. I can offer you this service. You can be sure that I'm doing a good job with the translation, making sure that all the terminology is consistent, etc. So I think a lot of good things are going to happen. I'm not sure if I'm going to be here by the time like it's really big, but I really think that it just started like the first time. It was 50 years ago when Eugen Wusser, I don't know exactly how to pronounce his name, but the father of terminology, the engineer who started doing the terminology systematically, was 15 years ago. But 15 years ago, it was a long time ago, but I would say right now, in 5 years or 10 years, we're gonna see like it's gonna grow even faster than 50 years back, because everything is happening.
Everything is happening much faster, right?
Yeah, everything is happening so fast, and I'm thinking, with all the new technology, it's gonna be. I think we're gonna be. I cannot say exactly, predict the future, but I just can't see, like, from everything I read every day on social media, and all the even the news you see, even in Facebook, if you look at your Facebook feed, so many new things coming up, and I believe that terminology has a great future.
Before we move to the next topic that we're going to talk about today, blogging, I'd like to read the question from Blue Lotus Translation, because it's closely connected with what we've been talking about just now. So the question is, what are the career opportunities for terminologists? Everything is getting automated. The main issue we translators are facing right now is machine translation. So what are the career opportunities, and how can machine translation influence the career opportunities for terminologists?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it's machine translation is an obstacle. Rather, I would say it's an opportunity. because, well, we as translators know that a machine cannot replace us. And we know why. I mean, we have the minds and the abilities that a machine doesn't have. So the opportunities for terminologists, I think they're big. It's going to be a matter of time. But I believe that as we progress and make terminology more known, which is the idea behind promoting terminology in social media, letting people know that it exists and that you have that you can get training. And I think there's going to be an increasing need for terminologists. I mean, it's already a need, but in organizations, in companies, they are going to be realizing the importance of having a terminologist. And usually the main issue is that say, well, it's really expensive because it really takes, it not only takes a long time, but it's really expensive. But like everything, it's an investment for the future, and it's going to save a lot of time for a client or a company or organization in terms of how fast can you get a translation out, making sure that it's a good translation, and that if you translate something today, it can be reused in the future in terms of the terminology, so that we don't get any issues with liability and all of that, because you know how that's a big issue right now, especially if you're writing manuals. Make sure that you get it right.
I might be wrong, but I don't really see how machine translation can hinder the career opportunities for terminologists, because as far as I know, machine translation engines are trained by feeding the texts that have been translated by human translators. And in case of terminology, and especially in some new areas that are appearing in abundance right now, so a human translator has to first come up with the terms, single out the terms.
Yeah, but to reuse them is not the same, because it depends on the context, and sometimes the machines don't get it.
Yeah, exactly. So in order for the machines won't be able to snatch the jobs from terminologists, because they have to first learn all those terms, and for that you need human terminologists. So that's I would say it's a pretty safe career.
Yeah. Well, it's I think people are always afraid that in not only in translation but in other professions, like machines are going to replace us, like the old times in the Industrial Revolution. But I think we have to think in terms of collaboration with machines, instead of as a tool, not just not a threat, but as a tool.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Patricia. I think even though machine translation might be seen as a threat, I think it's also an opportunity. And as a tool, we just need to figure out a way how to use the tool to our advantage and not the other way around.
The problem is that we as translators are convinced of that. We already know. The problem is to convince our clients or our companies of the value. That's a real challenge.
It's something that I've been thinking about, and actually there are a lot of parallels in other industries. For example, take I don't know, design. First, it was something that only, let's say a few people, not quite a few people, but still not very many people could do well, and that service cost a lot. Over the time, with the technology development, there were some platforms that you could use to come up with a design and things like that. So first, everyone was happy and they thought that, okay, now we don't need designers. But then at some point when everyone was doing that design, there was demand for real designers, because people wanted to stand out. Because if everyone can do a decent design by using those tools, those who want to stand out and take advantage of that, they need real designers to come up with something really unique. And so good designers now have more work than they can handle, and the prices are also quite high. And I think it's also the same in other industries like advertising and things like that. So I think it's going to be the same for translators. We basically don't have anything to do. We just have to probably wait a bit and keep our skills in good condition. So
well, I wouldn't say that we don't have anything to do. We have
to talk about it and just to show our value. But I think that smart people will see it, and they already see it. So.
Yeah. And you can see in social media how I think it's a great tool for terminology or for translators to start tweeting about it. And you know that the people in Luxembourg, headed by Rodolfo Maslias, they're doing a great job with, they are the ones who manage IATE, and their blog is excellent. They have a group of people, posting every day in social media, blogging about terminology every day, terminology and language in general, to keep everything coherent. But I think, they are doing a great job putting terminology out there to people, and they're doing it very actively, and they have been the ones who have been my biggest support. Because when they found out that I had the blog, I didn't know about them actually, with all the research that I had done. And I had the opportunity to be in Luxembourg 2 years ago, and they invited me. And wow, the work that they do in terminology is like, it's amazing. Everybody should get the opportunity to see that all the work behind IATE, and it's really, really, really inspiring.
Yeah, you're right. It's important to just be there and be visible to people, so that people know that there are terminologists, people know that there are translators, and the blog is actually a great way to keep that visibility, to attract people. And you, as someone who has a well-known blog, would you please share with us how you promoted your blog, whether you did something to promote it, or did people just come to read your blog posts?
Because I was new to social media. I knew zero about social media. I had a Twitter account, but I was like, I just had it there. And I think it might have been in LinkedIn when I made contact with Maria Pia Montoro, who is working in Luxembourg with these people, and I think she's one of the persons in charge of IATE now. And she said, well, just go to Twitter and follow the people who are following me. They're all involved in terminology. And that's where I met Licia Corbolante, who has this great blog in Italian about terminology. And I met Rodolfo Maslias, and that's how it all started. And all social media is important, but I think Twitter is the most active one, at least in terminology. We also have contact, have Facebook and what else we have other social media there, but Twitter is like the main. If you don't really like social media, just have the Twitter account, and that's. I always said that if you want to start a blog, if you want to start slow, but take the right step, do it with Twitter. That's my personal experience, because I think people are more active in Twitter. And that's how I started. Maria Pia, that's what she told me, and that's how people started retweeting me, and I started retweeting them, and that's how it starts. Especially if you're starting from zero.
A question. Yeah, I think everyone have to start somewhere, and I think it just takes a lot of time and, of course, effort before you get the recognition and the visibility that is required. So how did blog help you, your purpose of raising awareness about terminology, and how did it help your career in general? I mean, blogging.
Well, it has been more about bragging rights. because you know, I do it on my free time, during weekends, like at night. Well, especially at the beginning, you have to post a lot because, you know, we want to keep people engaged. But if there's something that you feel passionate about, then it's a bit easier. I would sit down at night, and instead of reading a novel, I would read a book, or from my iPad, I would look for information, terminology, and write down, oh, this is a great idea. Or even, you know, being at the beginning, I was a beginner too. So I was like, oh, what is this? So I would write it down and research about it. And I'm like, when I got the hang of it, I would write about it. And I think that was the good thing, that it was from the perspective of a beginner. So I was writing it, trying to explain it to myself. So that was the idea.
Yeah, actually, the best way to explain something, to understand something, is to explain it to someone who doesn't know anything about it. Yeah,
it's like when you're learning something and you take notes, and you really, in my case, I really have to write everything down. And that's, I think it was also that type of system that I had to read and write everything down. And it was easier then to sit down the next day, or the weekend in my case, because I have a full-time job. Sit down on the weekend and put everything into a blog post.
Yeah.
What are some of the tips you could give to someone who is just starting out and want to write a blog, for example, about terminology, or maybe about their niche that they work in? How can you come up with informative, interesting, fresh content every single time? I think it's quite difficult.
Well, actually, it's a good question. And like last week, 2 weeks ago, in my work, in my job, I started a bloggers club. Because people have been asking me that question in my job too. Like, how do you start that? And in February, I participated in an activity, and I made a speech about terminology and blogging, especially blogging. And people came and start asking me questions and saying, how do you start that? Like, I started a blog, but I couldn't follow up. And I know that a lot of people want to start a blog. And I always say, well, first of all, you have to have a passion. If you're not really sure that that's what you're going to talk about, it's going to die, because 80% of the blogs after 6 months, they disappear, because people really they're not really doing what they want, or either that, or they're not in the right niche. And because if you want to blog about translation, there's a lot of translation blogs. I mean, you really have to offer original content. Well, I guess I was lucky, because no one was talking about terminology at that time, except, you know, in Luxembourg, and Licia Corbolante had her blog in Italian. So I would say I was lucky that I got something that I really liked, and started loving it as I wrote. But also, it was something that no one else was doing. So I think that's I wouldn't say the secret, because it's really hard. Once you start, you have to sit down and write, and sometimes you get writer's block. But at the beginning, what you have to do is, I would sit down and write I would read the topics at night, the books, etc. I would write down ideas, and then sit down and write 2 or 3, at least the drafts of 2 or 3. And then as the time advanced, I would, you know, make them into blog posts. But you have to start, before you start a blog, you have to be sure that, you know, that's going to be unique and you have the material before you start. Well, that's the advice I give now, but actually my first blog post, I'm a bit ashamed of saying this, but my first blog post said, well, this is my first blog post. Let's see what happens. So, but you know, that's, but then a few months later, I started really, you know, noticing that people were interested and put a lot of time into that. And I'm really lucky that my husband is a freelance translator too, because he was really patient. Like, it was, we were watching TV and I was tweeting here, and on weekends, you know, I was lucky because he had to work. You know, freelance translators don't have a weekend, so he would work and I would blog. So it worked out fine. You have to find the time. I mean, you cannot have a blog and say, well, I'm going to write once a month, but for the next month I have no idea what I'm going to write about. You really have to be reading a lot. You have to update yourself every time, every day. Read something different, and that gives you a lot of ideas.
Yeah, consistency is key, as with everything.
Exactly. Yeah, and now, like, it's been 3 years, more than 3 years since I started the blog. And I feel that I can now relax because people know my blog, and I published the ebook a couple of weeks ago. And I have been writing much because I'm like, okay, let me take a pause. And actually, my last post was because I realized when I'm doing my ebook, since it was a collection of the posts, I realized that I had to update a lot of information on the blog. And since my blog is educational, it's not commercial, I said, well, I better get back to all those old blog posts and update links and make sure. I found some links that were not longer available when I was doing the ebook, and I'm like, wow, I really have to go back and revise. So right now, I'm in that stage.
You mentioned
housekeeping.
Yes, exactly.
You mentioned that you had over 500 posts on your blog, and your blog has been running for 3 years. Does that mean that you posted almost every second day?
No. Well, there were weeks that I only posted once, but there were weeks that I posted 4 or 5 times.
Wow.
It depends on the information that I found, and it doesn't have to be all the time about, you know, you writing original content. I share a lot of information about training, what other people are doing. So it doesn't have to. You don't have. It's like once you have your blog and you have the main structure, then you can start doing other things.
But what is the frequency?
And make it fun, because if you can see in my ebook, I also created infographics with the history, because I'm like, you know, who wants to read about history? And I said, well, maybe, you know, in an infographic, it's going to be, you know, just summarized, and it's going to be easier for people to learn about it, and more fun for me, not just reading text, but also being a little bit creative.
Yeah. What is the frequency that you'd recommend for a beginner blogger, for someone who's just starting out?
I'd say if you can, once a week. If you can, if you, like I said, if you have the idea of writing a blog, make sure you're ready. I know that I might be the exception, but once I posted that first blog post, I started really taking the time to choose the right topics and working on them and posting at least once a week. Once or twice. If you're starting, that's better, because I can see in my statistics, every time I post something new, it goes through. Yeah. And of course, use social media, because it's not just posting, because nobody was going to find out about it. Using the right hashtags and getting the right people in Twitter, for example, to retweet for you.
And you can also use the open mic to republish your articles from your personal blogs.
Oh, that's a great thing.
Shameless self-plug.
I congratulate you on that idea, because I know that many people who don't have a blog, that's a great way to start, to take that first step into writing and see what happens, as I said. Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, I don't see anything wrong with that approach of posting, starting to blog to see what happens. Because for some people, and I mean myself here too, it's preparation can at some point it can just mutate to procrastination. So too much preparation is not always good.
Yeah, too much preparation. Yeah, as I said, that's how I started. That's what I said in my first blog post.
Yeah.
And I just I had the material, but I was trying to figure out if to understand if people really wanted to know about what I was writing about. So yeah, you don't have to be like all prepared, and I'm an expert in social media, I'm an expert in blogging. Actually, my weakest part is the WordPress. I'm like, oh, what's this doing now? And it happened to me. It was hacked. It was hacked once. And another advice that I would say, if you're alone, try to find a friend or a family member who knows about blogging or social media, or has a website and knows about it. Someone who can help you, because I remember the last year I was the EAFT meeting in Luxembourg, and I was going to talk about my blog, and like, I don't know, half an hour before I started talking, my blog was not working.
Oh.
And of course, if you're talking to your blog, people are going to be, looking for it.
Yeah.
And it was like,
checking it out.
Yeah, exactly. It was like 300 people. And I'm like, but the one who helps me is my nephew. He's a famous DJ, and he has a lot of, pages, and he's all into that. And I'm like, I would send him a WhatsApp, and oh, please help me, what's going on? And he fixed it like in 5 seconds. So because you cannot be expert in everything, right? Yeah. So you have to have someone to help you.
Yeah, that's great advice. Is there anything else you can recommend to someone who's starting a blog? Apart from having someone to get help from, being consistent, being prepared somewhat. Make sure it's your passion, because once you start, if you have that passion, it's going to be a lot easier. It's not something that you feel that you have to do. It's something that you want to do. Yeah.
Yeah, great advice. What about those people who want to be terminologists? Circling back to the first topic of our conversation, is there anything you would like to add about terminologists, and any advice you want to give to anyone who's want to become a terminologist?
Well, read my blog, read the ebook, and at the end of the ebook, if you're not sure, maybe you're not cut for it, because it's all about what you feel. If it's something that you are interested in. As I said at the beginning, I was like, what does a terminology? I didn't know that if it was something that I wanted to do until I started learning what terminology was, what's all the theory and all the principles, and it's something that I can put in practice, something that I want to do every day. So it's not because it's my blog or my ebook, but I think it's a good introduction. And follow all the others. I mean, there are many. Beshar Fati, she's the one behind one of the people behind the university, the Pompeu Fabra's master's program, and she's starting her own blog on terminology called Terminosophy, which is a great name, by the way.
Yeah, it is.
And she's writing a lot about terminology, all the basics, a little bit more into the theory and the academic stuff, but it's really, really useful. And following her, following TermNet in Twitter, reading their blog, and see what just keep updated on everything that's happening, and read a lot. See if it's something that you would like to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your story, Patricia. It's a lovely story. For me, it's mostly about curiosity, because it was something that led you to terminology, and I think that curiosity is something that a good terminologist needs. So
for sure,
also
for sure,
beautifully interwoven here. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being our guest. It's always lovely to talk with passionate people. That's something we say a lot here, but it's just, we are so lucky to have this opportunity to get to know great stories of passionate people, passionate about something that they do. Thank you everyone who was with us today or tonight, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to check out the website of our sponsor at smartcat.ai. Please don't forget to share the link to this video with your friends and colleagues. If you're a newbie here, if you're watching our webinar for the first time, you can go to translatorsonair.com and subscribe to our mailing list so that you don't miss the next episodes, and we'll see you next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. See you in social media.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.